The Scottish Kings. The Scots came to Scotland originally from Ireland. You can find this story on the webpage Adam to Brian Boru, The Irish Kings. The Scots were descended from Noah through his son Japheth and through Japheth's son Magog. They settled in what is now Ireland, but as their numbers increased, many of them moved to the Hebrides, and from there to North Britain, what we now call Scotland. At the same time, around 600 BC, the Picts, another family of people descended from Magog, also started settling in Scotland. The Scots and the Picts tried to divide up North Britain between them, but ultimately their history was marked by violent conflict. The Picts were known for being naked, violent, and covered in tattoos. The Pictish nation finally came to an end during the reign of Kenneth, king of the Scots, in the 9th century AD. The Picts as a nation were entirely wiped out by the Scots, with the few survivors having to flee abroad. The following chart gives a timeline of the development of the Scottish nation from Adam. So we see, starting with Adam, we go down through the 10 generations to Noah. Then we have the flood, obviously. Then Noah had a son called Japheth, and then his son, one of his sons was called Magog. The Gaels, that is the Irish, and the Scythians are descended from Magog. This version of the story comes from an Irish chronicle known as the Labor Gabala Eden. In that chronicle there is someone called Goidel Glass. He was said to live at the time of the Tower of Babel, when God split up the nations. At the Tower of Babel, Goidel started the family of the Gaels and invented the Gaelic language. His descendants, the Gaels, left Egypt at the same time as the Israelites during the Exodus, and they settled in Scythia. They eventually left Scythia, and after hundreds of years, they found their way to Spain. The Milesians who settled in Ireland are the descendants of the Gaels. So far we've been following the narrative from the Labor Gabala Eden. We then go to something called the Illustrated History of Ireland, which was produced by an Irish nun called Mary Frances Cusack in the 19th century, who gathered a lot of information about ancient Ireland. And we come to two brothers who were the descendants of the Milesians, Eber and Eriman. Eber is also known as Heber. All the great Irish chieftains were descended from those two brothers. We then come to something called Holinshed's Chronicles, which I could do a whole nother video about, but Holinshed tried to produce genealogies and histories for all the countries of the British Isles, including Scotland and Ireland. One of the most famous descendants of Eber was someone called Simon Breck, or Briac, can be spelled either way, and he was crowned King of Ireland in about 700 BC, and he placed a marble chair which he had brought from Spain in Tara, the traditional seat of the Irish kings, where many successive kings were crowned after him. According to Holinshed's Chronicle, one of the successors of Simon Briac was called Rothsay. In his time the people had multiplied, and he transported some of them to the Hebrides, the islands which we know as the Hebrides. This was how the Scots originally came to the land we know as Scotland. By about 600 BC, the Scots had settled in a place called Agathelia, which was named after Goidel Glass, and we know it as Argyll. At some point in the 4th century BC, there was a king in Ireland named Fergu Hardus. He sent his son Fergusius to help his fellow Scots in Albion, who were at war with the Picts. Fergusius came to Albion, that is North Britain or Scotland, with an army and the marble chair. He was crowned upon the chair, also known as the Chair of Hope, in Argyll, as the first king of the Scots in about 327 BC. We now go to the Scottish Renaissance humanist George Buchanan, who gave a long list of Scottish kings in his History of Scotland, published in Latin as Rerum Scoticarum Historia in 1582. Buchanan has been called the greatest Scottish intellectual of the 16th century, and he produced a list of kings from Fergusius, that is Fergus I, to Kenneth MacAlpin. Fergus I is known as the first king of Scotland, although many regard him as legendary. Kenneth MacAlpin, or Kenneth I, is thought of by many commentators as the true founder of Scotland. Buchanan wrote in Latin, and so all the names in the following list are Latinized versions of the name of the kings. I have produced Buchanan's list as it gives a connection to the more recent kings. The House of Stuart accepted the list as historical, and James VI of Scotland accepted Fergus I as his ancestor. James became James I of England and Ireland after the union of the English and Scottish crowns in 1603. This gives us a neat connection between the English, Irish and Scottish kings. The following charts are the list of Scottish kings from Fergus I to Kenneth MacAlpin, according to George Buchanan. So there we have Fergus I, first king of Scotland, and then a list of names. Interesting there, we've got Caractacus. This person is mentioned by the Roman historian Tacitus as a British, that is Welsh chieftain. So it's interesting that he's in the histories of both the Scottish and the Welsh kings. Then we've got another long list of names. Donaldus I is thought of as the first Christian king. And we go on through the names. Fergusius there is Fergus the Great, Fergus II. Carry on down the names until we eventually get to Kenneth MacAlpin, who is traditionally considered the founder of Scotland, which was then known as Alba. And like his immediate successors, he bore the title King of the Picts. After Kenneth MacAlpin, the story comes out of the realm of legend into the realm of modern history, and the list of kings can be garnered from any encyclopedia. There are some famous historical characters on the list: Shakespeare's Macbeth, Robert the Bruce, and Mary, Queen of Scots. For me, the most interesting is James VI, because in him the whole story of English, Welsh, Irish and Scottish kings comes full circle. And as James I of England, he becomes king of all 4 countries. He is also the king who authorized a new translation of the Bible, which we know as the King James Version. This is the version which I use, and for me it is the English language Bible. The next 3 charts take us as far as James I. So we can see the Scots used to title themselves King of the Picts, and this carried on till Donald II, and after that all the Scottish kings were titled King of the Scots. We've got Duncan I, And after that, the Houses of Scotland was known as the House of Dunkeld rather than the House of Alpin. There's Shakespeare's Macbeth. Malcolm III is interesting because he married Margaret of Wessex, so uniting the Scottish kings with the Wessex kings. Their daughter was called Matilda of Scotland, so she was a descendant of both the Scottish and Anglo-Saxon royal families. Matilda became Queen of England when she married Henry I. So we carry on down through the list, and then it gets more complicated because there wasn't a clear line of succession. Margaret, Maid of Norway, was the only child of King Henry II of Norway and his first wife. Margaret, daughter of King Alexander III of Scotland, so she became a disputed Queen of Scotland. There was then an interregnum period when there was no king, and there was various contenders for king. The most prominent was John Balliol, and he was eventually chosen with adjudication by Edward I of England, but he proved weak and ineffective, and he was eventually forced to abdicate by Edward I, who then attempted to annex Scotland into the Kingdom of England. Then there was another 10-year interregnum when Scotland had no king. The Scots refused to tolerate English rule. We had these various people in Scotland. William Wallace and John came in and finding Robert the Bruce, who fought against the English. In 1314, there was the Battle of Bannockburn when the Scots routed the English. And by 1328, the English agreed a treaty to accept Scottish independence. However, they then renewed their war with Scotland, and King David was forced to flee the kingdom by Edward Balliol, the son of King John Balliol. Edward Balliol made repeated attempts to seize the throne in this period. Eventually his support fizzled out, and he renounced his claim to the throne, and David remained the rightful king of Scotland. Robert the Stewart was grandson of Robert I by the latter's daughter, and this was the start of the House of Stuart. Then we've got all these Jameses, and we come down to Mary, Queen of Scots, who was executed by Elizabeth I of England. Her son was James VI of Scotland, and consequently he was king. When he became James I of England, he became the king of England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales. James VI of Scotland was the last Scottish king. He is directly related to our current King Charles III. You can see the webpage called Adam to Queen Elizabeth II for more on this. The same can be said of Alfred Great of England, Cadwallader, the last British or Welsh king, and Brian Boru, the last effective king of Scotland. They can all be directly related to Charles III. James saw himself as descended from Fergus I. The Celtic population of Scotland are the Highlanders, who are descended from the Gaels. However, the Lowland Scots are from Anglo-Saxon or Germanic stock. Ironically, the Celtic Highland Scots, who had an inheritance of pure Christianity from the earliest times, have come to adhere to the Catholic Church. The Lowland Scots, who came to Christianity later through the Catholic Church, came to reject Catholicism and followed non-conformist Christianity. I'll examine this more in a video on Christianity in Scotland. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting, you can find more information at prophecy-workshop.com.